Hello and welcome to our first June AMA. My name is Alicia and I work with the Pactflow team. It is Tuesday morning, our time in Melbourne. We're really excited to have people from around the world, users and customers of Pact and Pactflow, join us for this Ask Me Anything session. I've got a couple of my colleagues here joining me this morning. I'll introduce them shortly. To give you a quick rundown of how we're going to work today, we've got 3 questions that we have tabled that we have collected from some of the most common questions asked on the Pact Slack channel of late. We're also open to taking any of the questions that you have, so please do pop those into either the comment section of the YouTube clip or the AMA, Pactflow AMA channel within the Pact Slack workspace. Before we get started, I'll just introduce my team here. So I've got 3 team members. Got Matt, Shane, and Beth. Shane is one of our new team members. Really excited to have you along, Shane. He's doing some marketing work with me. Got Matt and Beth. Matt and Beth are both contributors, core maintainers, of the open source Pact broker. Additionally, they are co-founders of Pactflow. Do you want to do a quick round the table hellos, and then we can jump into the questions?
Sure thing. Hello, I'm Matt. As Alicia said, I'm one of the maintainers of Pact. I look after Pact.js, Pact2Go, and various other things in the community, and also obviously a co-founder of Pactflow. So nice to see you all here. Thanks for coming.
Hi, I'm Beth. I'm the Pact Ruby and Pact Broker maintainer, and also a co-founder of Pactflow and an engineer at Pactflow.
Hi everyone, I'm Shane. Just here to help Alicia out in the team.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. As I said, please do drop any questions that you have into the chat there. We will get to those once we've answered the first 3 that we have got tabled for you. So let's just kick off, starting off with the first question. This one's an open one. Please, whoever wants to answer, please jump in. So how do pending pacts work?
Right, well, I think Shane would be in a good position to answer this.
Yeah, we've heard Shane.
Okay, no, Pending Pacts is my baby, my fault, my work. So Pending Pacts is a feature that we added to the Pact broker that works in conjunction with the Pact client libraries. And the reason we needed to create this particular feature is that the way that the workflow operates when you're adding a new feature to a contract goes something like this. The consumer needs to add a particular interaction to the contract first to kind of explain to the provider team how they're hoping this particular new feature will work. Then that contract gets published up to the Pact broker. Then it gets pulled down and verified by the provider code base. Now, the very first time you're adding a feature, it's like you're doing TDD for services, right? You're writing the test first, and then you're writing the implementation. Now, this works fine when you're doing TDD within your own code base, right? Because you'll be writing your own test, and then you'll be writing the implementation, and then you're committing those 2 things together. So you've never broken any builds. You've only broken your local environment when you have that unfulfilled test. But when you do it at a contract level, the changes made by the consumer team end up breaking the provider team's CI pipeline, and there's kind of not really a good way around that. The way that we always recommend that people add new features to a pact is to always create a feature branch on the consumer and publish the pact from that branch rather than making the change directly to the main pact. Now, the way this helps avoid breaking the provider is that when you publish a pact, we recommend you tag it with the name of the branch. Now, the provider would be configured to verify the pact from the main branch, And we always recommend to verify the pacts from the production environments as well. However, there's no procedural way to stop the consumer team making a change to the main pact that is being verified. So it is quite easy via accident or intent for the consumer team to make a change that blocks the provider's pipeline. Now, this makes provider teams really cranky, obviously. It can stop the provider team actually deploying a hotfix. It could stop them deploying to the test environment. It means that even if the provider is still compatible with the production contract, that they're blocked from deploying to production. So obviously we needed a way to make this better. We needed to fix this issue. We can't have this situation where the consumer team is able to stop the provider team from deploying. So this is where the Pending Pacts feature comes in. If you enable the Pending Pact feature on the provider verification configuration, when a brand new contract content comes in, the broker will identify that this is a brand new content that has never been successfully verified before, and it will mark this particular Pact contract as pending. Now, you might be aware of test frameworks that have this concept of marking a test as pending. And when a test is marked as pending, it means it can fail without failing the overall build. That's pretty much how a pending pact verification will work. If a particular pact is marked as pending, when the verification process runs on the provider pipeline, even though that verification will fail and the failed verification result will be reported to the broker, the overall verification task won't exit with an error code. It will exit with a success code. So this means the provider pipeline can continue and the provider can deploy to prod, deploy to test, do whatever they need to do without being stopped by that unimplemented or failing pact. Now, obviously, we don't want pacts to be in pending all the time because we need to be able to identify when there is a genuine regression. So if the provider has actually made a breaking change that would actually cause a problem for a consumer if it was deployed. So there has to be something that changes a pact from being pending to not pending. And that something is a successful verification. Basically, that successful verification from the provider is a way to say, yes, we do implement this pact. It's like an implicit acceptance of this pact contract. So once you've had that first successful verification, from then on, if there is a failure, that failure will cause the provider verification build to error. So this keeps the build safe, if you will. We're correctly identifying when there's a regression, but we are also not allowing new expectations to break the provider build. Does that make sense to anybody who's listening?
Yeah, you actually answered a bunch of questions for me, Beth. So that's very good. Thank you. I'm actually going through the FAQ on the Pending Pacts page. It's probably worth talking about the I guess there's webhooks there, but I'm confused by the whole thing bit. And so I think one thing you've done a really good job of is printing out the different events that occur throughout the sort of life cycle of a pact. And that's something that's been, I guess, somewhat standardized across the different languages now as well. So they're printing out what's going on. Would you care to comment a little bit on that bit as well?
Yeah, so what we've been trying to do is add a lot of messaging into the Pact broker so that when you interact with it, it explains what's going on and why. So one of these things is that when you do a Pact verification, it will tell you why a particular Pact is being verified. For instance, it might be because it's the latest Pact from the main branch. It might be the latest pact that's deployed to test or prod. And if you've enabled pending pacts, it will explain why it is or is not pending. And if it passes or fails, there'll be a message that prints out that explains why it is either no longer in pending or why it is still in pending. So it is quite verbose, but if you follow along the output when you do the Pact verification test, it should help explain what's going on and why.
Great, thanks, Beth. I think that's a pretty good start, Alicia.
Awesome. Well done, Beth. Thank you. It's very thorough. And I guess if anyone's got any additional questions, they can always find you over on Slack as well and ask those. So thank you. Again, a reminder, if you've got any questions that you want tabled for the team this morning, please pop them into the comments. We'll now move to our second question. So how do WIP Pacts work?
All right. Well, again, I think Shane would be the best person to... No. Okay.
Interesting. I can answer these.
I'm looking forward to the day when Alicia is the one explaining all our technical questions. It won't be long.
Well, this question is really better answered by Phil, I think.
It's true.
Phil, if you're out there, please.
Yes, Phil is sometimes I think he understands how it works better than I do. All right, so I'm so glad that you asked the pending pact question first, because WIP Pacts is an extension on the pending pact concept. It relies on pending pacts to do its job. Now, let me explain the problem that the WIP Pacts feature was built to solve. So, as I mentioned earlier, when you make a change to a pact on the consumer side, what we recommend that you do is create a feature branch of the consumer and publish that changed pact from the feature branch of the consumer. And because we always recommend you tag with the name of the branch, this means that the changed pact will go up under a feature tag, let's call it. Now, on the provider side, they typically have a configuration that says verify the latest pact from the main branch of the provider, verify the pacts from the different test environments and production environments. Now, if they want to implement this new feature pact, what they're going to need to do to pull that pact in is to change their configuration locally in the provider code base, so that they're pulling in that new feature pact, because otherwise it would just be ignored. It's not one of the standard pacts to verify. So this kind of creates a backlog on the provider, right? If the consumer wants to get feedback on that changed pact after that initial change, they're waiting on the provider to perform an action to change that configuration, and it's something that has to kind of be committed to the code base, and it's just a bit fiddly, right? Where unless there's really good communication, the provider team might not know that pact has been changed, might not know it exists. So what we really want to do is get that feedback on whether that feature pact passes without the provider team having to make any explicit changes in their code base. So what WIP Pacts does, WIP stands for work in progress, is if the provider team has enabled the WIP Pact feature on their side, when the verification task is running, the pact broker will look at all the pacts that are the latest for their tags. So it would have already said, okay, I see you're configured to verify the main pact and the test pact and the prod pact. But I can also see there's this feature pact over here. Now this feature pact doesn't yet have a successful verification. So I'm going to include this WIP pact in the pacts to verify as a pending pact. So that means that every time the verification runs for the provider build, we're getting feedback on whether or not this pact has passed without the provider team having to change the configuration, and also without breaking the provider build because it's in pending. This speeds up that feedback loop so that people don't have to be sitting there changing the configuration all the time. It will remain as a work in progress pact until it gets officially verified by being one of the pacts that is specified in the list of consumer version selector. So it becomes one of those main or test or prod ones. So basically, until the consumer has merged in their branch to their main branch, and until it is kind of an officially accepted pact. So it's a bit hard to visualize. It's much easier to see it when you're actually doing a worked example. But it's important to understand that the WIP and the pending calculations are done based on the content of the pact. So essentially we're saying once that content moves from being the content published by a branch to being the content published by the main tag, then it stops being a WIP pact. It's a bit complicated. Hopefully that makes sense.
That's a good question. I think the way I think about it, and I think I tend to simplify things sometimes, which is obviously good sometimes, but a problem in other cases. I think of
probably needs it.
WIP packs is basically what the consumers need to help them get feedback more quickly from the provider, so to prevent them having to orchestrate with the provider.
Yep.
And pending packs are for the providers to prevent consumers from breaking them. That's how I think about the two at the highest level.
That's a really good way of explaining it. Much simpler.
I'm glad I'm on point. Cool. Thanks, Beth. I think this is great because these questions they're some of our most popular questions, and because it is a complicated topic, it's good to have Beth talk to them because really no one does know them better than Beth, despite Phil being very, very good. Awesome. Thank you.
Nice one. Thanks, Beth. Thanks, Matt. Again, just a reminder, pop any questions that you have into the chat. We will get to them very shortly. I've got our last one tabled, ready to go. So this one is in relation to webhooks. So ultimately, understanding what webhooks are, how do they work, the event cycle, and debugging them. Who can speak to this one?
Shane.
I'll take
there's
this
a bit of a pattern this morning in today's AMA. They may all mostly be targeted at Beth.
They're saving them up for me. All right. So webhooks. Webhooks are configurable HTTP requests that will fire in response to events that happen in the Pact broker. Now, the main reason that you would want to trigger a webhook is because you've published a changed pact and you want the provider build to run to verify the changed pact. So there's two reasons why you might want a verification. One is that the provider has changed itself, and in that case, the provider build will run just its standard provider build, and as part of that pipeline, the verification step will run that basically says, give me all the pacts. I want to make sure that I'm backwards compatible with everything that's out there, make sure I haven't broken anything. The other reason we want to verify the pact is because from the consumer side, a pact has changed, and we want to find out essentially whether the provider is forwards compatible. So in that case, we configure a webhook in the Pact broker. It's a once-off operation that has an HTTP request that will trigger a build of the provider that's just that verification step. We don't need to do the whole thing, and we don't need or want to verify every pact either. We just want to verify that changed pact. So what we do is we pass through the URL of that changed pact in the webhook. So the webhooks allow you to do templating. So what you're going to need to do is find the documentation for your CI/CD software and find out how to trigger a build using their API. Now, in the Pact docs, we have templates for all the most popular CI/CD pipelines that people have contributed back to the docs. So have a look there first, and most likely you'll find the exact request that you need to trigger that build. So we've configured our webhook. We've put the URL of the Pact into that HTTP request. There'll be some sort of way for you to pass that property into the build, either via an environment variable or some other kind of build property. And then the provider team will need to set up a build in their pipeline that passes in the URL of that changed Pact in to be verified by the verification task. That will run and then publish the verification results back to the Pact broker. Now that's one of the ways that the Pact broker helps get you that fast feedback as soon as possible. We're all about trying to shift left, trying to get the contract results as early as possible in the process so that we are committing as few bugs to the code base as possible.
Thanks, Beth. It's probably worth making a note as well, just in terms of being able to debug them. So have we got some debugging webhooks here as well? So there's a few things in the broker that you can do to be able to get to the bottom of them, because obviously webhooks fire asynchronously. You're not, most actions, you're going to be calling it directly via API or through the user interface, and you're going to get feedback immediately to say, well, that did work or didn't work, and you'll be able to chase it up. Whereas webhooks are those things that they fire asynchronously based on other events, and those events are calculated by the broker, and the broker's got intelligence in them. So they're kind of doing this coordination. So in terms of being able to go what went wrong with them, you're going to need to look into different options to be able to debug them. Yep. So again, there's another docs page here that talks through all of this. Just quickly noting as well, Beth was mentioning some webhook templates. So you can see here's a sort of a template library that is based on really common things that people do. But in terms of debugging them, the main endpoint is when you're actually looking through the API, you can make your way to the webhook that's actually firing itself, and you can look at the logs through there. So there's a section on how you can actually get to the logs, through the open source Pact broker. In Pactflow, we've got screens that do all that as well. So it's a bit easier. You can sort of get to the webhook page, click out the executions for them, see all the executions and the ones that passed, the ones that failed, and see the log entries for that a bit easier. But the open source broker still has that data as well.
Yeah. So one of the most common questions we get is, why did this webhook get triggered, or why did it not get triggered? And that's something that I've actually addressed in some work that's going to be released very soon. There's a new API for publishing contracts that will respond with a response that basically said what happened when I published this contract. So it will say, hey, I detected that the content changed, or I detected that there was a new tag added, and we'll give you a link to allow you to go straight to the logs for that webhook. So it's going to be much easier to debug what did and didn't happen, and then if a webhook did get triggered, what happened when that webhook got triggered. So that should be out sometime in the next few weeks.
Yeah, nice. Cool. Thanks, Beth.
Beautiful. Thank you. And we'll pop some of those links in to the notes on this question also when we publish this post-event. So we've got a couple of questions that have come through on the chat. Thank you very much to Constantine. Let's see how many we can get through maybe in the next few minutes. See how we go, guys. Are we happy to maybe table a couple of those and then work through? Awesome. So we'll just go from the top. So thank you, Matt, for getting that up. So can a user be synced with our AD of Google users? Can one user be a part of multiple teams?
Yep.
So this
happy to give Beth a break on this one. I'll answer. So yes, it doesn't sync with Google. The way it is, you enable Google authentication on the account, And when a user wants to try and log in, they have the option of logging in via your Google account, and then they'll be dynamically provisioned into the system at that point in time. So basically, they can authenticate via Google. So I think that's probably what you want. And yes, they can be part of multiple teams. Definitely.
Nice. So the next one is in relation to having number of brokers within a team. So internally, we're considering having more than one broker, maybe one per project. What would be recommended, and also on the performance front? And is there scope? Is this in the scope of the teams, and can we have shared access?
Yeah, so a couple of questions there. I think the recommended approach, and this really is the same with the open source as well. So really, you just want one broker for your company. That's the general guidance, because what happens is eventually, if two systems start to overlap, you now have two brokers with just islands of data. So at the very least, with Pactflow, we would definitely recommend a single broker, because you've got teams to manage users, and you can use our permissions model to prevent users from this team doing something for applications in other teams. So we would definitely recommend, at least with Pactflow, a single broker, and usually with the open source the same. Scope of teams, that's probably a really big question to try and talk through how that works. But essentially, there is a model that enables you to restrict what you can do based on your team membership. Is there shared access? Maybe we can talk about that one offline. If we're talking about sharing users, I'm not sure what that means, but you can certainly overlap who has access to certain things using the teams and permissions model. So maybe I'll leave it there, and Constantine, we can talk offline in Slack or somewhere else if you have further questions on that one.
Nice one. All right, next question. Excuse me for getting my head around all of this. So in part of your product description, IoT, high volume messaging for sensors and devices. Question is, can this be a bit specific? Is there a solution that is scalable, maybe thinking around containerization or something along those lines?
Yep. So I think that's probably just on us. Basically, the use case here is, we're just saying the Pact itself can work for IoT use cases. So you think about contract testing with HTTP services or message-based services. IoT kind of fits into the message-based service. So in the past, I've actually used it on an IoT use case. There's a data streaming kind of use case, and Pact is really well designed for that, because you can use it to check between the different stages of that data enrichment, that the data is going to be transformed safely while spinning up lots of services to pick up the piece of data, enrich it, fetch it, put it back together, pass it on to the next phase. So it's really more about the contract testing use case than is about Pactflow. So hopefully that answers that question.
Awesome. Another good question that we've got here. So this is sort of in relation to, I guess, Pact and the open source broker and Pactflow. Ultimately, you can either host it yourself or you can utilize the Pactflow product, which is our proprietary solution. So this question here is just in relation to the support that is provided through Pactflow. What is provided through an enterprise price plan? Questions about SLAs and what's the approach for that?
Yeah.
That's
so
probably
standard. Yeah, I can quickly answer that as well. So the standard terms and conditions on our site, if you go to pactflow.io/terms, there's a section on our uptime and our SLAs there. So you feel free to go on there and have a look at the SLAs and look at the compensation if we don't meet them. There's also a separate enterprise one for much larger customers who need more dedicated kind of response times through ticketing or something else. Oftentimes that might be the enterprise actually wanting to negotiate the SLA itself. So I guess the point here is there's graded options, but our standard one is 99.9% uptime per given month, and we've got a compensation model that will basically compensate you on the fraction of time that we're down in terms of your actual subscription cost, and we'll basically refund that. So we won't refund it; we will credit you for the following month. Yep. But yes, I think the overarching question here is, if you've got other questions around that, we can drop us an email to hello@pactflow.io, and we can continue that conversation there.
Cool. All right. Well, hope that's answered all the questions that we've had tabled today. Hopefully this has been helpful. Of course, this is straight on YouTube, so anyone can come along and rewatch it at any time. We're going to close out now. So I just want to thank all of our speakers and guests. Thank you, Matt and Beth and Shane, for coming along, being here with me today. Looking forward to having you join us at our next session. We've got a 2nd June AMA in about 10 hours. We'll be going through some new features that we'll be rolling out, as well as answering your questions. Have a wonderful evening, wonderful day, wherever you are. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Alicia.
Mhm.